Hey everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with historythroughcards.com. Hope you're all doing very well today. This video, I want to tell you the story of Wee Reese. And Wee is someone I've known for a long, long time. I really heard Wee Reese's name since I was probably 5 or 6 years old. So, what is really interesting here is that he's actually one of the first ball players that I actually actively collected as a teenager. And one of the first cards that I actually got of Pee Wee's was the 1958 Tops, and my grandmother actually got me this card. I think it was because it was maybe the first time I was in the 8th grade, and it was the first time that I hadn't actually been in detention. And I think I spent the entire 8th grade in detention. That's another story altogether. But she actually got me this card, which is really kind of interesting because I've told you guys on numerous occasions that my grandmother really didn't understand my hobby. She didn't understand sports cards, yet she did like baseball. She was a real big baseball fan, and she obviously knew who Pee Wee Reese was. And you know that saying, everybody and their grandmother knew who Pee Wee Reese was. Well, my grandmother definitely knew who Pee Wee Reese was, and she bought me this particular card. I really like this. This is one of my favorites, actually, not just for the fact that she had gotten me this card, and she didn't like my card collection, which was really interesting. But if you guys haven't seen the backs of the 58s, 58 tops are really interesting. I have like a love-hate relationship with them because some cards are really nice, while I think the majority of the set isn't. I don't really have an affinity for the set because first off, I wasn't around in 1958, contrary to popular belief of my friends. A lot of the 1958 tops, the cards themselves, the stock is really soft, and it really can create a challenge for anyone who wants to collect the 1958 tops. And I would even say the 1957 as well. And I do have a 1957 tops Pee Wee Reese, which I actually recently just acquired. And I really like this card. The 57 tops is one of my favorite sets of all time. I think it's because of the photography. And in this case, sorry, the glare and the camera really doesn't like to pick up this card, but I'll show you a better example as we go along. What I really like about the 57s is the photography. They're a little bit of a challenge and a really interesting set. I think it's one of the first times that Topps actually had Kodachrome film, and I'll show you the backs of these. I'm sure you guys have seen these, but it never hurts because I'm sure there's somebody out there who hasn't seen a 1957 tops or a 58 for that matter. So it never hurts. Anyway, um, this one actually took me a very long time to actually acquire. For the most part, a lot of the 57s that I was coming across, they either have some kind of damage associated with them, or print streaks or spots, or in a lot of cases, they're not centered very well at all. So you might want to keep that in mind if you ever want to decide to add a few to your collection. And I do highly recommend it. So the next Pee Wee Reese card that I have is the 53 tops. And this is really cool. I've always enjoyed the 53 just because it's the artwork, and I'm an artist. So um, the black down here, that represents a National League, and the red represents the American League. And I know that's, you guys already know that, but there's somebody out there who probably doesn't. And you know, when I was a kid first collecting, I didn't know any of this stuff either. I had to ask people. And so one thing you want to keep in mind if you want to collect the 53s, chipping is a huge problem down in the corners and the border right here. And also on the back, they look something like this. And this one, I heard that Jerry Dorvick did a lot of these, but he said that he didn't do all of them, and there were other artists that were associated with the 53s. And I'm still looking into that to see if I can find out who the other artists are. probably do a video on Jerry Dorvac. He was in college at the time that the 1953 tops came out, and they had actually asked him to do a bunch of portraits. I think they paid him like $20 each for, but I'll have to look into that. And then I have 1952 Bowman. This card, it was growing on me. At first I didn't really like it. I really didn't pay a whole lot for this card. In fact, I didn't pay a lot for any of these cards. Um, Pee Wee Reese, I don't know outside of his rookie card how much he's collected, so I don't really know what you should be paying for his card. He is a really historic character in baseball and I think in American society as well. He's got a real big pop culture following. So this one, it's okay. I didn't pay a lot for it. Unfortunately, the camera doesn't really like my cards. I'll show you the back of it. It looks like that. Really plain back. But the other thing too with the 52 Bowmans, which you'll see with the 51s, is the colors are a lot different. I think they're a lot more muted uh, with the 52s, and you can see with the 51 here. Um, and I'm not a really big fan of this card. I think I paid maybe $20, if that, for this way back in the day. It looks like he's got like a not a 5 o'clock shadow, but like a 6 or 7 o'clock shadow. It's a very dark card to begin with, and he looks like Muggsy. I'm sorry, but he just does. So I'm not a real big fan of this card, but it is Pee Wee Reese. And I'll show you the back of this card too. There's a gum stain on this, but I'm not entirely sure. It's to me, it's not a detractor, but for some people it might be. And I'm not entirely sure how PSA grades these things with gum stains. I'd rather see a gum stain on a card, especially if that card is really expensive, because I don't think that anybody yet knows how to forge a gum stain on the back of a card. I could be wrong here, but you guys will let me know in the comment section below. I know. So today I found a bunch of articles on Pee Wee Reese, three of them to be exact. Actually, I think four, because I want to talk about his 1953 Bowman as well, and that's probably one of his most famous cards. I think it's actually one of the more famous cards from the 1950s, and it's got a really great story all to its own. And Pee Wee Reese's rookie, a lot of people say that it's the 1941 play ball, and it is. He's got a 1941 double play as well, and that one's actually a lot cheaper. In fact, the 41 play ball is really going to cost you guys something. It's very expensive. It actually was always expensive, I think, just because Pee Wee Reese is a pretty big name, and he's a Brooklyn Dodger as well. And it used to be back in the early to mid 1980s, and I think even maybe in the early 1990s, that there was a premium placed on Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Yankees. And I'm not sure if there still is a premium for those guys. To me, I think it's kind of dumb, but that's how it was. And I think it was like 5% or something like that, which could probably make or break somebody. I have no idea, to tell you the truth. If you're gonna not purchase a card because it was a 5% or 10% premium based on the fact that they were a Brooklyn Dodger, um, someone could say, screw it. But I'm a really big fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers, their history, especially in the 1940s and 1950s. And Pee Wee Reese has a huge role to play in the Brooklyn Dodgers. I'm probably going to talk more about Brooklyn Dodgers players in future videos because there's a number of them that I want to get to. I never met Pee Wee Reese, but I met a lot of his fellow players, and he's well represented in Roger Kahn's The Boys of Summer from 1972, which is a book I highly recommend anybody reading. Anyway, getting back to Pee Wee Reese's rookie, he does have those two rookie cards, but he's got a card that's prior to that 1940 in the picture pack. and I'm not entirely sure if anybody actually considers that his rookie. It is actually his first appearance on a card. So if you're looking at it through that lens, that the player's first appearance on a card or even a premium is his rookie, then there you go. I have seen it a couple of times. I usually don't see it at shows. I see a lot of his 1941 double play and his play ball, especially. But again, that's a really expensive card for anybody who wants to collect the 1941 play ball. They're beautiful cards, but they can often have a washed out look, especially with the Ted Williams. And Pee Wee Reese is really no different, too. Also, those cards can be off center quite a bit and have a lot of print streaks associated with them. So you might want to shop around there for a bit. And then also with the price tag, too. I've heard that that card can go for about $1,000 now, but that's really crazy to me. But it is what it is, and people set the price, not the dealers, and so you might want to shop around here. However, I did find a couple of really interesting articles here that I do want to share with you guys today. I think you're going to find them really interesting, as I have. And again, I really love Pee Wee Reese. I love his story, and he's, I think, a very collectible guy. One card that I don't have, and I used to, was his 1956 Tops. And quite frankly, I want to know why he looks like Mike Myers from Hollywood. These two guys, they look exactly alike on this particular card. It's just so weird. You can judge for yourself. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but it's really funny. And I sold that particular card years ago. I don't know why I did that because I'm a real big fan of Pee Wee Reese. And I've tried to acquire it again, but it's just really gotten pretty expensive over the last couple of years. So anyway, guys, let's get on to these articles, and I'll meet you on the flip side. This is from the Alton Evening Telegraph, Alton, Illinois, April 6th, 1940. Rookie of the Year, harder to pick from 1940 crop, but Pee Wee Reese appears to be best prospect by Gail Talbot, New York. It is not as easy to point a finger at the Rookie of the Year this spring as last year when Ted Williams of the Boston Red Sox towered like a lighthouse over the other baseball freshmen. Williams more than fulfilled every expectation and had only one serious rival among the big league beginners, Charlie Keller of the Yankees. Williams' average of .327 was not quite equal to Keller's .334, but the limber Boston youngster proved himself a mean greater distance hitter than the swarthy Yank. Is there a slugger like Williams or Keller in the 1940 crop, or a pitcher like Atlee Donald, who won 13 while losing only 3 for the Yankees last year? Possibly, but those who have watched the juvenile stars train from Florida to California have failed notably to agree on the most likely to succeed. Dominic DiMaggio, another Red Sox recruit, carried the biggest burden of advance ballyhoo, just as Freddie Hutchinson, Detroit's Wonder Boy pitcher, did a year ago. Hutchinson was a monumental disappointment, and it remains to be seen whether the youngest of the DiMaggios can come close to living up to his billing. Dom had little opportunity to prove his ability before he injured an ankle in an exhibition game at Tampa, so the season may be well advanced before the Sox learn whether they received their money's worth. In the meantime, DiMaggio has surrendered the rookie headlines to Johnny Rucker of the Giants. The kid from Atlanta has been pounding the ball at a 400 clip in the South and appears to have clinched a berth in the Giants' outfield. Here again, however, is a player like DiMaggio who is not a distance hitter. Oscar Vitt, the Cleveland manager, believes he has truly great shortstop in Lou Boudreau, who finished with the Indians last year but still may be classified as a rookie. But even if Lou's fielding is everything Oscar says it is, he still has to prove he can hit big league pitching. Brooklyn almost certainly has the future shortstop star in Pee Wee Reese from Louisville, who led the American Association last year in base stealing and three base hits and was the sensation of the Little World Series. Purely on a hunch, he might be our Rookie of the Year. At least Reese is blessed with the same carefree confidence that attracted the critics to Williams a year ago. Looking around for a pitcher who may burn him up in his first year, the choice falls upon Sid Hudson, the 6 foot 4 inch right-hander who jumped from the Class D Florida State League to the Washington Senators. Sid twirled 28 complete games last season and won 24 of them. So just in case you guys were wondering, the Rookie of the Year award was first awarded in 1940 by the Sports Writers of America in Chicago. And then in 1947, it switched to where prior to that, it was only awarded to one ball player. And in 1947, it switched to being awarded to one player in the American League and then one in the National League. And I've heard it actually goes back to like 1900, but I can't quite confirm that. This is from the Gettysburg Times, July 19th, 1984. Pee Wee Reese and Pegged Pants by George Zucker. Jim Palmer makes more money selling underwear than he does throwing baseballs. Former football great Joe Namath sold pantyhose. Product endorsements are big business nowadays for the superstars of Major League Sports. O.J. Simpson and Arnold Palmer are in the rent-a-car business. Mean Joe Green pushes coke. John McEnroe touts close shaves, and Bubba Smith and a whole gang of sports figures drum up for light beer. You probably don't know it, but this lucrative cottage industry for big name jocks began 35 years ago by Pee Wee Reese, the doughty shortstop of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Reese, 65, will be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame at Cooperstown, New York on August 12th. He never made the Fashion Hall of Fame. At 14, I saved my pinboy money and set out to look like Alan Ladd. All the cool kids in Union, New Jersey swore by the American Stores in nearby Newark, a flashy clothing emporium on Broad Street, known in the late 1940s for its fake palm trees and neo Hollywood fashion. It was not a store mothers dragged sons to for confirmation suits. So when I finally had enough money, I took the bus to Newark for a solo shopping spree and strode proudly into the American stores. Abloom with shark skins and serges, there was a hub toward the rear of the store in the men's suit department. Shoppers were gathered around the salesman, talking excitedly. No wonder the sales force was led by Pee Wee Reese, Yogi Berra, and some of their top teammates from the 1947 starting lineups of the Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Yankees. They were part of an American Stores promotion that was one of the pioneer advertising campaigns employing sports figures. Television was still in its early days, and baseball had yet to make the tube on a regular basis. There were no megabucks in pro sports then, and even the top players had to scratch around for extra money during the off season. The jobs at American Stores were not just for show. The ball players were there to work as salesmen. Maybe their presence was good for business, but I never did find out if Pee Wee Reese ever sold any suits. He didn't sell me one. There was no way I was going to walk up to a boyhood hero and say, I'd like to see something in a nice shark skin with dropped loops and pegged pants, and maybe one of those wide-brimmed hats like Alan Ladd wears in the movies. Pee Wee noticed me hanging back and walked over. Can I help you? No thanks, I said. I'm just looking. You don't talk to heroes about pegged pants. I went home empty-handed. The kids at school couldn't believe I rebuffed the sales pitch from Pee Wee Reese, the Dodgers' famed #1. You must be crazy, Finky Myers said. I'd bought a tie or something and never wore it. Pee Wee Reese, for crying out loud. Mickey was a baseball nut who had a cardboard box filled with baseball cards in his room. He had hooked a number of us on wing cigarettes just to get the baseball card that came with each pack. I'd buy a suit from Wee Reese, Mickey Myers said. It took him a month to save up the money. Then four of us hopped the bus and headed to Newark. Emboldened, I brought my money along and figured maybe I'd buy a suit from Pee-wee and the hat from Yogi. Shoot, I might splurge and let Phil Rizzuto sell me some French cuff shirts and get a tie or two from Gene Hermansky. But we struck out. The ball players weren't there. A salesman said the promotion ended a week before. I asked if I could get a sharkskin suit with a dropped loops and 9-inch peg. No problem, the salesman said. Mickey Myers didn't want anything. Wee Reese, he said, for crying out loud. This is from the Los Angeles Times, August 19th, 1999. A tribute to Captain Courageous by Roger Kahn. We were working on a film, Wee Reese, his son Mark, and myself, 5 years ago, and we were trying to get one memorable story right. The film was an hour-long documentary on the old Dodger captain and shortstop, which Mark had titled A Quiet Ambassador. The story we sought recounted a single brief, moving deed, but it had been told and retold and mistold so many times we had a hard time reconstructing the scene. Was it Boston, that old abolitionist center where the Red Sox practiced apartheid baseball until 1959? Was it St. Louis, the old Major League city that was closest to the heart of the Confederacy? In the end, it turned out to be neither. The place was the river town, Cincinnati, and that made the story all the stronger. Wee Reese grew up in the Louisville area when segregation reigned, and whenever the Dodgers traveled to play the Reds, some of his old ball-playing friends from Kentucky made the easy drive up the Ohio River Valley to watch Reese work at his trade at Crossley Field. The year 1947 was different from what had gone on before. The Dodgers were starting a black man at first base, the first to play in the major leagues since 1884. Now, after 60 years, the cotton curtain was coming down. That was not to everyone's satisfaction. As the Dodgers moved into infield practice, taunts began. Fans started calling Jackie Robinson names: Snowflake, Jungle Bunny, and worse. Very much worse. Some Cincinnati players picked that up and began shouting obscenities at Robinson from the dugout. There Jackie stood, one solitary black man, trying to warm up and catching hell. Reese raised a hand and stopped practice, then walked over from shortstop to the first base and put an arm around Jackie Robinson's shoulders. He stood there and looked into the dugout and into the stands, stared at the torrents of hate. A slim white Southerner who wore number 1 and just happened to have an arm draped in friendship around a black man who wore number 42. Reese did not say a word. The deed was way beyond words. After Pee-wee came over like that, Robinson said years afterwards, I never felt alone on a baseball field again. Reese detested bigotry, hatred against blacks or Jews or Latinos, whatever. I never knew anyone whose life was more towering example of decency, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with fairness in the right as God gives us to see the right. The words are Lincoln's. The character that comes to mind is that of Harold Henry Reese, who died Sunday at 81. A funeral service was held for Reese on Wednesday in Louisville. After starring in a Presbyterian church league, Reese turned professional in 1938 when he was 20. He had to quit his job as a line splicer for the telephone company, and the foreman said sternly that the phone company would always be there, that by leaving it, Pee-wee was making a terrible mistake. I'm young, sir, Reese said. I can afford to take a chance. Recounting this, he gave me a gentle smile before he added, where that foreman might be today, I don't know. He joined the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1940 when Larry McPhail was restoring a ball club that had been more famous for gag lines than base hits. The Dodgers had not won a pennant since 1920, and John Lardner wrote of one-star slugger Floyd Caves Herman, known as Babe, did not always catch fly balls on the top of his head, but he could do it in a pinch. Another Dodger outfielder, Frenchie Bordigari, came home standing up one afternoon and was tagged out. "Why the hell didn't you slide?" asked manager Casey Stengel. "I was gonna, Case," Bordigari said, "but I was afraid I'd crush my cigars." Reese was droll and often very funny, but after he moved in as Dodger shortstop in 1940, comedy came only after winning. The Dodgers beat a fine Cardinal team for the pennant in 1941, and after World War II, Branch Rickey picked up from McPhail and assembled a team I called the Boys of Summer. Reese was a very fine shortstop, a great base runner, and a superb clutch hitter. He played every inning of every game in 7 Dodgers World Series. He was a captain who led by civility, however difficult the circumstances. Panama City, Florida, 1947. Spring training was winding down, and Rickey was about to promote Robinson from the Triple-A Montreal Royals. Some veteran Dodgers, Hugh Casey, Dixie Walker, prepared a petition that said, in effect, "If you promote the black man, trade us, we won't play." Walker brought the document to Reese, confident that Southerner to Southerner Pee Wee would sign. Reese refused. 5 or 6 older players pressed him. He was going to let Rickey make him play with one of them. "I'm not signing," Reese said, and the petition died. As it happened, I rooted for the Dodgers and Pee Wee Reese when I attended a Brooklyn prep school and kept rooting from secondary school and college, and even when the New York Herald Tribune hired me to write sports, which meant that I was professionally neutral. I was neutral, all right, neutral for Brooklyn. When I was 23, the Tribune assigned me to cover the Dodgers, and I walked into the clubhouse trying to choke back awe and introduce myself to Reese. "It's a pleasure to meet you," he said, "but you don't want to hang around me. Why not, Mr. Reese? I'm not good copy." We became closer than the journalism textbooks say is right. One night in Brooklyn, the late Joan Kahn, my first wife, was sitting in a photographer's booth when a foul ball bounced out of the upper deck into the metal support that held up the big lens on the old-fashioned cameras, and the ball spun backwards, hitting her and breaking her nose. As she was being cared for in the first aid room, Walter O'Malley sent me a message in the press box. "Don't bother to sue. Courts have held we don't have to protect that location. If you sue me, you will lose." Pee Wee's comment in the clubhouse was different. "How's your wife getting home?" "I'll drive her," I said, "but I'll have to write my story first." "Take your time with the story," Reese said. "I'll drive Joan home." When I finally arrived, he was applying soothing talk and an ice pack to a patient who was in pain, but delighted with the company. The next spring at Vero Beach, Reese said, "You've played a little ball. Why don't you go out to left and shag a few?" When I got to left field, Gil Hodges stood in the cage. He dashed a nasty line drive over Reese's head, and the baseball came bouncing toward me, looking curiously like a hand grenade. Who else was on that field? Reese, of course, Robinson, Duke Snyder, Carl Ferrolo. If there's a God, I thought, please don't let this one go through the wickets. I moved up slowly, dropped down to one knee, and the ball plunked into my glove. Wow. Then the shortstop called my name. "Yes, Captain. You're supposed to pick up the ball before it stops." Reese could say things few others dared. A dour, white-haired old Scot, Roscoe McGowan, covered the Dodgers for the New York Times. He loved to play cards and seldom won. After a night game in Philadelphia, Reese and I stood on a platform waiting for a midnight train to Penn Station. McGowan said he had a bad run of cards for 3 days, for the 3 days before that and longer. "Damnable run of cards for the longest time," he said. "Roscoe," Pete said, with a soft voice and warm smile, Did it ever occur to you you may be a horse poker player? Once Robinson was raging against the steady run of knockdown pitches he had to endure. Jackie was, in fact, a fierce competitor and a withering, sometimes unpleasant needler, hardly the bland Saint Baseball it celebrates today. Jack, Pee Wee said, some guys are throwing at you because you're black, and that's a terrible thing. But there are other guys, Jack, throwing at you because they plain don't like you. Robinson blinked. No one but Reese could talk to him that way. Then Robinson nodded and said, you've got a point. Reese had some rules after he'd caught a pop fly. He'd never been held up, say, two fingers signaling two outs. This is the major leagues, he said. You're supposed to be able to keep track of the outs by yourself. Besides, they're on the scoreboard. Once the Dodgers' backup catcher Rube Walker won a game at Ebbets Field with a home run, and in the clubhouse a photographer took one picture after another. Finally Walker snapped, that's it. I got a bridge date with my wife. Reese bounced up from the captain's chair beside his locker. Rube, you had a job to do on the field, and you did it. He said, this man has a job to do here. You'll stay in the clubhouse until he has all the pictures he needs. At length, the New York baseball writers voted Reese their Good Guy Award. He told me on the phone from Louisville that he was nervous about making a speech at the Waldorf Astoria, and maybe I could meet him there and look over and edit the text. I'm getting some help here, he said, from a friend that knows the classics. Here is the speech that Reese presented to me and delivered to an audience of 2,000. I didn't change a word. Gentlemen, if I possessed the oratical fire of Demotheus or the linguistic elasticity of Branch Rickey, I would wow you with superlatives. But frankly, fellers, I ain't gonna do it. Thank you very much. He was playing shortstop at Yankee Stadium on October 4th, 1955, when the Brooklyn Dodgers won their only World Series. Fittingly, the final out was Elston Howard's ground ball to short, and some said Reese choked and threw the baseball in the dirt, and only Gil Hodges' great pickup saved him and all of Brooklyn. Nonsense. The throw was shin high, an easy catch for a big league first baseman. Somehow Reese and I ended up late that night toasting the universe on West 57th Street. Pee Wee's face was shining, a child's face on Christmas morning. Can I ask you something? I said. Sure. 2 out in the ninth. You played on 5 up till then losing series teams. You're 1 out from winning a World Series. Howard's up. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, said the bravest shortstop I've ever known, I hope he doesn't hit the ball to me. Reese probably didn't want to manage the Dodgers. He was semi-offered the job in 1954. He told me they said, you don't want to manage the team, do you? Pee Wee, probably not, and certainly not when they made the offer the way they did. He became a broadcast partner to Dizzy Dean, and then an executive to Hillerick and Bradsbury, the company that manufactures Louisville sluggers and gloves and hockey sticks. He invested sensibly. He never earned more than $35,000 playing shortstop, but he became comfortable. We stayed close on a terrible night in the summer of 1987. He was 22. When I buried my boy and came home, I knew deep crevices of despair. Toward midnight, the phone rang. Do you remember, Pee Wee said, that I was the captain of the team? Of course. Well, I just want to say for all the fellers, we are very, very sorry. Now, as Mark Reese was creating his documentary, A Quiet Ambassador, he brought Reese, Bobby Thompson, and myself together on Bedford Ave, the street that runs behind the late but well remembered right field wall at Ebbets Field. After some baseball talk, Mark said, I'd like to talk to you about your late son and Pee Wee's phone call. I'd rather not, I said. It's very emotional. I don't want to go misty in front of your camera. You ought to get over that, Mark said. It's not the way it used to be. The macho nonsense. Guys are allowed to cry. I looked at Pee Wee. The captain's expressive face and said, "Again, no words. It's your call." The camera rolled and I told the story, and there was Pee Wee right in front of me, and he said, "So I will be very, very grateful to you for all for the rest of my days." I blanked away and a little missed and kept control, but there was on Bedford Ave, Pee Wee Reese's burst into tears. They were there for my dead son, Roger Lawrence Kahn, and they were there for my grief, but they were there for much more than that. They were for all the bereaved, the stricken, and the bereft, all mankind. As I composed these lines, Pee Wee Reese, the immortal shortstop, has moved past tears. One dreams of heaven, and of course, no one is sure, but I know this: Pee Wee Reese is alive in the minds and the hearts of everyone who knew him. And I also know that the atoms that were the man remain. Now we shall hear him in the thunder, and see him in the lightning, and feel him in the rain. Facing the fatal hemlock, Socrates said, "To a good man no evil can come, either in life or in the after death. Pee Wee is safe." This is from sabrbaseballcards.blog. There's no name associated with this article, so it is, well, it's kind of strange, but it is called "The Story Behind the 1953 Bowman Color Pee Wee Reese Card." The 1953 Bowman Color Pee Wee Reese is one of the most popular and iconic cards ever produced, and yet, surprisingly, very little documentation exists on the origins of its creation. Who took this striking photograph of Reese leaping in the midst of a play? Why does this card look so different from the other Bowman color cards? And who is that base runner on second? The main reason these questions persist can be traced to the famous commercial war between Topps and Bowman Gum of the early 1950s, which left Bowman on the losing end of things. In any war, commercial or otherwise, the loser rarely gets much of a chance to tell their side of the story, and the details are soon lost to time. As such, much of the Bowman legacy was unceremoniously thrown out or auctioned off into the ether, and so here we are, decades later, as collectors attempting to put the puzzle back together again in the hopes of shedding some light on these marvels of pop culture. The majority of the photographs featured in the gorgeous and eye-catching Bowman color set were taken during the 1952 season. It's widely known that the folks lighting, composing, and snapping these shots were also taking photographs of Marilyn Monroe, Gary Cooper, and other cultural giants of the time to grace the covers of many major publications of the era: Sports Illustrated, Life, Look, National Geographic, to just name a few. In order to ease the workflow for the New York City based photographers, Bowman arranged to take most of the shots in two of the game's biggest hubs: Yankee Stadium for the American League players and the Polo Grounds for the National League. Not to be completely left out in the mix, there's exactly one card that represents Ebbets Field, where Brooklyn first baseman Gil Hodges mans his position against the backdrop of the iconic Schaefer Beer scoreground. But sprinkled here and there throughout the 160 photos captured in New York stadiums are a handful of outliers: spring training shots of players fielding and throwing in staged poses that feature palm trees instead of grandstands as backdrops. In 1946, the Brooklyn Dodgers would spend their spring training at City Island Ballpark in Daytona, Florida, the site of Jackie Robinson's appearance with the Montreal Royals in an historic exhibition game versus Brooklyn that same year. The Brooklyn organization was still a couple of years away from the purchase and conversion of a World War II naval base in Vero Beach that would famously become known as Dodgertown. It was here in 1946 that the now iconic image of Pee Wee Reese leaping over base runner to make a throw to first base was taken, 6 years earlier than the majority of the photographs from the 160 card set. When you compare the environment behind Reese in the photo It is most clearly matches up with the low fence and sparse tree-lined backdrop of the Daytona ballpark. The Reese card would be one of the few that fell outside of Bowman's 1952 season-long photo shoot. As it turns out, this particular image had a life in the public eye well before it was used on a baseball card in 1953. Images from the Reese photo shoot were featured in several magazine publications in the late 40s and early 50s, including a 1950 edition of the National Police Gazette and a 1946 edition of This Week magazine from the New York Herald Tribune. While the image used on the magazines is slightly different, it's no doubt from the same photo shoot. Thanks to the Reese publications, it is finally possible to identify and give credit to the photographer of this unforgettable image, David Preskin. Preskin's work can be seen across a myriad of publications from the era, most of them depicting sports figures in the midst of their craft. Although he did cover live sporting events, his most striking image are posed moments of athletes in action. From these works, it's easy to see how Preskin's disposition to capture athletes in motion led him to favor Reese's leap for his image. It's worth mentioning that Preskin's horizontal image of Reese was not the only card of its kind originally being considered for the set. A Bowman Color Proof card exists, which has been dubbed Dodgers in Action, clearly following the same formula of a horizontal card depicting action from the field. Although this image appears to be from an actual game as opposed to Reese's staged leap for Preskin, ultimately the Dodgers in Action card never made it past the concept phase. Traces of a horizontal action subset from the 1953 set. It's fun to speculate. Lastly, the debate as to which player is desperately hanging on to second base underneath Reese lingers to this day, with names like Morgan, Hodges, and Snyder bandied about. The theory given most credence seems to be the one offered by Reese himself, who was asked about the photo years later. He identified Stanley George Fronci Bordigari as the base runner, which checks out. Bordigari was with the Dodgers up until the start of the 1946 season when he was released. He was soon offered a coaching position with the Dodgers minor league system. With no definitive proof on the card, however, collectors are still inclined to speculate. Starting intently on the folds of the base runner's jersey, straining to make out the number on his back. Now, why is the runner facing the wrong way on the base paths? Despite being known as an action shot, it's clearly a posed moment for Preskin, who was likely less concerned with the game's accuracy as he was with grabbing an aesthetically pleasing moment. Bordigari is not sliding so much as he's lying down, allowing Preskin to focus his attention on getting the best shot of Reese's leap. These cards, once thought of as trivial bits of ephemera for bicycle spokes and shoeboxes, have grown in both value and lore over the decades. It's only fitting then to give credit where credit is due. Warren Bowman and his cohorts, along with some talented hired guns, David Preskin among them, who went out into the ball fields of the late 1940s and early 1950s to shoot some of the most breathtaking images the hobby has ever seen. That was really interesting. At first, I remember when Pee Wee Reese was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1984, but it's really interesting that you have different generations that are looking at the players that they grew up with and saying, the guy that I grew up with is the best of all time. No, the guy that I grew up with is the best of all time. And my father would have seen Pee Wee Reese play here and said he's the best of all time, where I would have said somebody that I had seen grow up is the best of all time. So I think it's generational who the quote unquote best of all time is. Uh, Ask anybody from like the 19 who was around in the 1950s, and they would say Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays or maybe even Duke Snyder as the best outfielders of all time. Well, I probably would have said maybe Dwight Evans, because I saw Dwight Evans play, and so again, it is um, generational. At least I think it is. I'm pretty sure. Statistically, it's a different story because people look at players in two different lights. Uh, First, they look at the statistics, and then I know some people look at WAR as well. I think WAR is kind of flawed, but we'll leave that alone because I know it's going to get a lot of hate my way. Anyway, so they look at stats and then they look at the contributions of the ball player, outside of stats. And I think Pee Wee Reese here, his contributions to baseball and to the Brooklyn Dodgers far outweigh his contributions at the plate. It's social contributions. What he did was to stick up for Jackie Robinson, despite him being a Southerner. And there's a lot of racial tensions on the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947 and in Major League Baseball. And so he really kind of stuck his neck out there socially to support Jackie Robinson. If there's a American League contemporary of Pee Wee Reese, it's Flash Gordon, who was basically in the same role with the Cleveland Indians and Larry Doby, and his story really hasn't been talked about nearly as enough as Harold Pee Wee Reese here. And Pee Wee Reese also lost at least 3 years to the Navy. And what was he going to say? No, I'm not going to go into the military. Right? That's not going to happen. That generation was very patriotic. So, again, he lost out some of his best years of his life to the Navy. The other thing too, when he was a young rookie, something really interesting was that the Red Sox actually had him in the minor leagues, and Joe Cronin famously got rid of him because he saw Pee Wee Reese as somebody who would take his place, or he just come up with the Red Sox, and Joe Cronin would be out of a job. That's the kind of guy Joe Cronin was. He felt that you were a threat to his position. He'd get rid of you as soon as possible, and I'm not a big fan of Joe Cronin. I never have been. But again, he's in the Hall of Fame too. And there's a lot of what's really interesting here is I haven't really seen this in any other Hall of Fame, but you have tiers of Hall of Famers. And I really don't understand that because if you're in the Hall of Fame, you're in the Hall of Fame. Who cares if you're a top tier, a lower tier, or a middle tier Hall of Famer? A Hall of Fame is a Hall of Fame, I guess. You guys could comment in the section below to tell me if I'm wrong here. But I don't see any distinction really between Ted Williams or Chick Haffey. Well, maybe there is, but you guys know what I'm talking about. If you're in the Hall of Fame, you're there for a reason. And I know Chick Haffey is a bad example because of Frankie Frisch, but and I'll probably get into a video on either Frankie Frisch or Chick Haffey at some point because both of those guys are really interesting. And you could always make the argument to say that a lot of there's are ball players there in the Hall of Fame that don't actually belong in the Hall of Fame because they either got there through either Frankie Frisch or another sports writer. And some people have made the claim that Harold Pee Wee Reese here doesn't actually belong in the Hall of Fame either because his stats don't warrant it. I think some ball players uh, they're in the Hall of Fame not because they have great stats, because um, their contributions to the game outweigh their stats. Phil Rizzuto, I think, is a great example of that. Buck O'Neill is another. And Buck O'Neill, you could really make an argument that he is actually in the Baseball Hall of Fame as a contributor and not exactly what he did on the field as a player because his stats really kind of don't warrant they really don't warrant it. So um, you can make that argument towards Buck. I love Buck O'Neill. He's a great human being, great representative of the game, and that's I guess that's that. So you could actually make maybe a pretty good argument that Pee Wee Reese is in the Hall of Fame not for his stats, but for his contributions to the game of baseball and to the Brooklyn Dodgers. And the Brooklyn Dodgers have a really great history behind them. And I'll probably do other videos on the Brooklyn Dodgers here. So, guys, let me know what you think of Wee Reese and if he actually should be in the Hall of Fame. Obviously, you're not going to take anybody's plaque down from the Hall of Fame because you don't feel like they deserve it. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But I think Pee Wee Reese really stuck his neck out for Jackie Robinson and the Brooklyn Dodgers. Was a great representative of both, and he's got a really interesting story. And I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. And if you have any favorite cards of his, I'd love to hear your stories. And until the next time, guys, I will talk to you later. Have a good one. Bye.